For those of you who are here for session 1, it's exactly the same as what it was with it being a recorded session. For those of you who weren't here, ETAQ is trialling something new in order to reach the regional members who can't be with us today by recording some of our sessions and making it available to them through the ETAQ site. And obviously you would need a special password to access it, but for storage purposes it will be hidden in the depths of YouTube. And so don't think you're going to be in the top 50 views or anything, it's okay. So you won't be seen, but if you do speak, you may be heard. Just to give you that warning, unless you want to do a bolt in front of Kelly. Last session today is with the lovely Kelli McGraw from QUT, and I personally find that whenever there's a digital story session at ETAQ, Kelli seems to be the presenter, so I think she's our guru. And I'm a little bit scared because this year Kelly's not coordinating the digital story competition, she's allowing me to. So I'm hoping that I can learn many, many things from Kelli so that we can encourage digital stories in the culture with our students. So thank you, Kelli.
Thank you, that's lovely. And now that I'm up here, I'm thinking I might actually get you to do my slide progression if that's all right. And you can see the joys of that mouse pad firsthand. Okay, so as you heard, my name's Kelli McGraw, I'm from QUT, and I was an English teacher before I started lecturing at university. I did all my English teaching down in Sydney, so this seems to be like, you know, the New South Wales room today. We just had Diane here presenting now, you know, I'm a bit of an expat. But I've been up here for 5 years now, working with QUT, with ETAQ, to support especially our pre-service teachers and our beginning early career teachers going into schools. So I guess like Di, who found the experience, was that those teachers really like graphic novels, they also tend to like digital storytelling. But that doesn't mean they have the skills or the knowledge to then translate the enjoyment they get from that form into teaching that in a classroom. And that's not just the new teachers, that's our experienced teachers as well. When you've got a new form that looks kind of exciting, it looks really promising, but then you've got to ask yourself those questions like, how am I going to scaffold this when it's so new to me that I don't understand the steps? And how am I going to assess something like this when there's all those problems with digital stories that we get with other creative writing, that there's elements of subjectivity, and how am I going to know what to mark and all of those things. So hopefully I can discuss some of those things today. By all means, do pop your hand up and interrupt me throughout the presentation if you've got something that I'd like to talk more about. What I'm going to do is start with quite a lot of talk to frame up some things in terms of what digital stories are and how we think about them in terms of a medium or a genre and those kinds of things. But a lot of the session will also be hands-on stuff. So I've got some digital stories here today to play for you, and these are stories that students have made for our ETAQ digital story competition last year. So I'll take you through the process of watching those, and the handout that you've got in front of you has got on the front page the marking rubric that we use for that competition. So you'll get to have some practice marking those. If you're anything like me, then you're missing out on your marking pile at home to come here today. So never mind, you can still do some here. Yay! Okay, so hit my next slide there. If you want to make some contact with me or with the seminar during all of this happening, if you're on Twitter, you're welcome to do this. If you're not on Twitter yet, but you wanted to and you needed someone to follow or something to look at, here's some tips. So this is me. I'm KMCG2375, mysterious. If you want to follow ETAQ, they're ETAQ, like QLD at the end, you can find them there. And if you're at an ETAQ event, whether it's a seminar or the state conference or the beginning teachers day, if you add this hashtag into your tweets, it means that people who search for this will be able to find the conversation. Okay, so there's just a bit of digital literacy for the day. All right, swap to the next one, Chris. Now, I said I'd start with me talking, but I'll give you a little break in between. Can I get you to turn to probably the person next to you? We've got maybe, yeah, we've got some pairs and you might have a little thread there. And just, some of you do already know each other, but go through some of these anyway. What's your name? What school are you from and what's your role? but this is the main one. Is digital storytelling popular at school, and how do you know that? You know, who have you talked to? What have you seen? Let's just take 2 minutes to do this. Grab your pen and go. Yes.
I think I'll be yeah, because I had
Okay, start. Next, everyone. So everyone just listening again. Right. Thank you. Just waiting for our last group lecture. It's fun. Play a bit of weekend teacher. So I won't ask you to share your stories, but just listening there going around, I could hear kind of a mixture of people talking about how it's something that you wanted to do, but it was finding difficulty getting the traction or getting other people to be willing to experiment. And I heard some other people saying, no, it's not at our school, and that's why I came today. And other people saying, you know, like starting to get quite rigorous things over things like about reflective writing, journals, and that kind of thing. So here's the outline of what I'm going to talk about today, and hopefully get you thinking about too. Firstly, I do want to go through some nuts and bolts in terms of what a digital story actually is. Because if you're thinking about digital as everything that happens on a screen, then all of a sudden is every music video a digital story? You know, so I don't think that it is. And so we'll talk a bit about that. I'll give you some tips about where you can find some digital stories, and there's a few different types that you might want to go and look at. We'll spend quite a bit of time in groups, so I'll stop talking then and lead you through watching some videos and talking about how we assess digital stories. And then, because today's quite practical and hands-on, and so the takeaway is really for you to get your hands dirty and play with it. That's the big takeaway. But I do have some, you know, what to say to the boss when you get back home. Why is it important for students to make digital stories? So I will give you those takeaways to take back to school. All right. So what is digital storytelling? Hit me with the next one. I had this question in my head for a while, and I knew that I had a couple of people that could help answer the question. One of them is Dr. Angela Thomas. I knew her from Sydney University, but now she's down at University of Tasmania. So click to the next slide. I was at a conference where we were talking about storytelling, and we were exploring these kind of ideas. You know, the idea that storytelling has existed for a very, very long time. Digital storytelling is not new in that sense. We had a look at these kind of tree pictures. You might not be able to see all of those. Maybe if you switch around and look at your own screens, it might be a little bit clearer. So you see down the bottom of this tree, it's like this is the storytelling tree. And then as you go up, it kind of splits into oral and written storytelling. And then those things branch off into other kinds of modes or mediums. You can see things go from the scroll to the codex to the bound manuscript up to newspapers, you know, those kinds of things. So starting to think about digital storytelling as existing as part of this big trip. And it was interesting to juxtapose that with this picture here. Unfortunately, I don't have a reference. This is one of those pictures that you find on Pinterest or Instagram and then you don't know where it came from. So if anyone finds it and knows, do shoot me an email. But this one here, the idea that all these birds up here are now communicating, twittering away, but it's with social media and social networks. And what has that done to impact storytelling? So hit the next slide. And when I was at Angela's session, she was able to take some of those bigger concepts and turn that into something that was really useful for me as an English teacher, which was to actually discuss the different types of digital stories, and she offered some categories, and I'm going to share them with you today. I have shared them before, so they're there, and some people might have seen them. But so for anyone who doesn't tweet, the next vegetables into the chocolate, you know, sneaking in some digital literacy here. You read tweets from the bottom to the top. So the first tweet we had was down here, and then as the tweets happen through the conference session, they go further up. So I said, hey, it's time for Angela Thomas. She's speaking about digital fiction. She was also speaking about Inanimate Alice, which is a text we both love and advocate. She says, there's a great variety of digital fiction. We're starting to map the types. Type 1, you can have digital replications of known texts. So for example, you might have an ebook, or where Project Gutenberg puts a lot of the stuff that's out of copyright up for free. Hit the next slide. You might have digital embellishments or enhancements to known stories. So people are probably familiar with Pottermore, where J.K. Rowling has taken the Harry Potter stories and she kept them, and she wouldn't release the ebooks because she was making this special website called Pottermore, where it extends some of the story in that digital form. You can have digital transformations of known texts. So you might be aware, and if not, you can go and have a little look. There's versions of Alice in Wonderland that are made specifically for the iPad, you know, to work with iPad features in the tablet. She said you can have digital reversionings, or refigurings of known texts. So something that people will be less familiar with is Angela did some work in that virtual reality space called Second Life, and she got some research money to actually build a thing called Macbeth Island. And in this virtual reality of Macbeth Island, have you seen it? She goes into, so she makes this island. I just imagine her sitting up late at night, you know, on her computer, putting stuff in and ghosts and quotes and stuff. But on the island, you walk around and you encounter characters from Macbeth, or you walk through quotes from Macbeth that then you can hear as you go past. And there's this bit underneath where it's like the supernatural underworld of Macbeth, and all these scary, spooky things happen downstairs. So that's something that's totally different, you know, it's a digital reversioning. It's a refiguring, but essentially it's still the story of Macbeth. All right, next one. She says that you can have born digital fictions, so something like Inanimate Alice, or something like Machinima, which is where you get like video games and you record the characters doing stuff. So, you know, you get little army guys like Red versus Blue going up to each other and going, oh, hey, isn't it great if you got a sandwich? When, yeah. They have these really funny little conversations, if you've ever seen it, Red versus Blue, you know. So you've got that kind of thing, and then there's blended stories where you use things like augmented reality, and that's really kind of this new frontier of storytelling. You might be on a website and click different parts of a map, and that takes you into a story world for that part of the map. It's based on reality, but it's a little bit augmented. Now, that is a lot to take in, right? But it's a beautiful safety blanket. At least I know that over time I can take this in. At least I can see that there's some kind of logic developing here that I can share with my students, that I can use to explain to them different, I guess, levels of interactivity, different levels of changing texts or transforming texts. And I don't know if these types are here to stay. I don't know if Angela's finished with these versions. I haven't thought about whether I'd like to argue with these versions. I'm still at a very happy place where I'm okay to have these at least, and I can use them as a discussion point. So hit the next one, and this is just one more thing that I came across on Twitter a couple of weeks ago. And a guy called Simon Kelli, I think, his handle is OzTeach. And he put this up. He's doing a uni subject, I think, on information communication, something like that. And so he was trying to communicate something visually through an infographic. And he used Robin's work. And if anyone wants the papers or the links or things, just you can shoot me an email and I'll send this to you. But he used Robin's work that said, digital stories are stories that will do one of these three things. And these will look pretty familiar to us in terms of inform, persuade, entertain. But they are either personal narratives, or they might be a story that's designed to inform or instruct, or it might be a story that examines historical events, almost like a non-fiction or an autobiography or a biography, something like that, little documentary. So we've got some frameworks that do exist in terms of what are the purposes of digital stories, and also what are the different types in terms of how digital or interactive they're getting. So where can you actually find something? Because that sounds lovely, but until you actually go and engage with some digital stories, I think it's hard to wrap your head around. For me, the idea that there's just these digital stories, it sounded like multimedia. You know, it sounded like whatever is a kind of compression of some video and some sound will be a digital story. So hit the next slide for me, and here are some places that you can find digital stories. Okay. If you don't want to scramble to write this down, I'll put my first slide back right at the end. It's got the link to SlideShare because I share all of these slides online. So there you go. All right. So here are some places you can go to. There's actually an electronic literature collection. They only did them every few years. I think they're only up to volume 2. It's not something that comes out all of the time, but each collection has lots of stories in it. So that's the link to volume 2. There's this really groovy interactive novel, and it's called, what am I looking at? Yeah, 253. And in 253, the website looks really funny. It's like an old-fashioned website that's just all white with blue writing. But each connection on there is a carriage of the London Underground. And as you go into each of them, you can see who's sitting in each seat. And then as you click on the hyperlink, it tells you the story of that person. And as you read through the carriage, and you choose the order that you read it, you piece together the story of what happened that day on that train in the London Underground. It's pretty cool. But that's a good example of really amazing text that's not really flashy. You know, you can actually show students that things can be cool without being hyper-animated and Pixar. So telescopic text is one. If you go to this website, all you'll see is 3 letters that say something like, I made tea. But they've all got grey boxes around them, and every time you click the box, it expands out like a telescope, and eventually you get this massive story. So it's like, you know, I made some tea, I made some hot tea, tiredly, I made some tea, and just. And they've got a new thinking now where students can write their own telescopic text. I haven't tried it, but it looks pretty good. Lastly, shopping list is a hypertext. And in shopping list, you go to a site, and there are pictures of probably about 15 ingredients, and you can click them in almost any order that you want. I think you can. And you click them, and this lady talks all about her husband, and sometimes when you click the shopping list item, whether it's lettuce or milk or butter, she's got something really lovely to say about him. Other times she does not. You know, I can't believe he came in and got the wrong thing from the shop again, you know, she says about the celery or whatever. But by the end, it's a very happy resolution to the story. So those are just some places you can start. Hit the next one. You can also look, I've mentioned Inanimate Alice. It's a whole workshop in itself, so I won't get started on Inanimate Alice. But it is a born digital fiction. We call it a digital novel. And at the moment, I think there's 5 episodes. The 5th episode either just came out or is just on the verge of. So if you haven't been there, do yourself a favour. Episode 1 only goes for 5 minutes. In each episode, Alice gets older, her language gets more sophisticated, and the people that she talks to, she goes to a different country with her family all the time. Super amazing. But if you've only got 5 minutes, just watch episode 1, you'll get the point. Okay, next slide. They even made a whole section for Alice in Australia for us, where they made this website where Alice came and stayed with a different family in Melbourne. What's good about this is that you can go there. It's connected to Education Services Australia and all their kind of stuff. And what you do is you download a little program and all of the materials for the students to make their own digital story out of the same materials that they've used to make Alice in Australia. So you use a picture of the dog and the house and stuff and you reorder it yourself, which is great. Next slide. That's just some pictures from Alice in Australia. So hit the next slide. I didn't realise until after I've been at QUT for a couple of years, because faculties don't always talk to each other a huge amount, that there's actually a whole centre for digital storytelling in the Creative Industries faculty at QUT. Who knew? Lots of people in creative industries do. Anyway, now we do too. And I've got the link on the very last slide, but if you just Google QUT and digital storytelling, it pops straight up. And they do lots of workshops with people learning how to write this more specific form that's called a digital story. So all of the other examples that I gave you just on those other slides were called things like digital novel or hypertext or whatever. Technically, they're all digital. Technically, they all tell stories. But when we're talking about digital storytelling, there is actually a very specific form that is starting to be put together. And it's not particularly new. I don't know, I don't want to embarrass myself now by not knowing how long it's been around for, but I want to say like at least 8 years, 10 years. Daniel Meadows does a lot of work in the UK with BBC Wales, and he's got a website called Photobus where he did all of this stuff on digital storytelling. And the idea is that if you don't make the form very, very specific, and it's totally open in the way that everything that's digital and tells a story is a digital story, then that's not useful. It doesn't help students know what to reproduce. And so he made something that was a lot more useful, or he was involved in making that anyway. And so now we talk about digital storytelling, and when I say we, I mean QUT Creative Industries program, Daniel Meadows and his kind of folks over at the BBC, and people who are trying to use this in schools in a way that students can manage, right? We are using rules. And it's rules like digital stories should only be 2 to 3 minutes long. So anything that's kind of going for 5 and 6 and 7 minutes is too long. It's not a digital story, it's starting to be a short film, you know, or something else. They're not really supposed to use a whole lot of moving image. It's supposed to be a combination of still image and of a narration over the top. You can use music, but generally you don't in a digital story because the focus is supposed to be on your voice and the pairing of your voice and the images that go. And those images will either be illustrative, you know, I'm talking about a hamburger, here's a picture of a hamburger, or they'll be metaphoric, you know, and you'll have a conversation with your students about what they want to do in their story, if they want it to be like illustrated, or if they want it to be more symbolic and metaphoric. We'll talk soon more about the rubric, but with the ETAQ storytelling competition, we actually give higher marks for students who've gone into that symbolic and metaphoric space for the images. So it's not necessarily an either or. I think when they become more figurative, the story does become richer. So those are the main things. It's time it's short. Music is okay, but generally that's not the point. And also limiting the number of images. So rather than being a whole big lot of images that go together, or something that's like claymation, maybe where you put together heaps of still images to make something progress, that's starting to be something that's more like an animation, you know? And so even though the product might still be 2 minutes long, it's digital, it's on the screen, it tells a story, the way that it's produced is more like an animation, a frame by frame kind of thing, than a traditional digital story. So that's what I am going to talk about today, is that form. Now, I'm very happy for you to reject that and say, that is straitjacket. What if my kids want to do a digital story that's 3 minutes and 45 seconds long? Surely that's okay. What if I tell them it's a maximum of 12 images and then they use 15? Surely that's okay. So it's up to you to go away and think about how much you want to move those boundaries. You know, very rarely do we go into schools and teach short stories and actually talk to students about industry standards for the length of a short story. Very rarely do we make them write anything 8,000 words long, you know. So you can have those conversations, but also bend the rules in terms of what products they are actually going to make, okay? Slide here. How do I assess? That's all very well and good, Kel. It sounds like you're going to make some great stuff. And it's going to be short too. So if I've got a class of 30 and they're all 3 minutes long, then I might actually be able to mark that in an achievable amount of time rather than going through all of their short stories with my pink pen on a Sunday afternoon, you know. So that's interesting. How do I assist? Take a moment now to have a look at the rubric that's in front of you in the handout. You'll see that you can see at the bottom where we've gotten this from. So this rubric was actually prepared by the Western Massachusetts Writing Project, or something very similar to it was. But there was another friend of mine, a colleague called Steve Shan. We were both chatting about it. We liked that they had a rubric. We liked where they were going with it, but we wanted to tweak it. So we worked a little bit on their rubric, and this is what we came up with. We thought it was closer to what we maybe do here in Australia, or closer to the curriculum, or, you know, just those kinds of things. So the idea is that you, when you're judging a story, you will think about these 5 things. You'll think about the story itself. You'll think about the use of voice. You'll think about the use of images. You'll think about the use of words. And then you'll lastly think of the parameters of that project. Did they fit it into the time frame and all of that kind of thing? So while I go to the computer and I set up some videos for us to watch, can you again turn to the same partner group that you were in before? Have a look at the descriptions that are in the 10 and 9 column, like what a student would have to do to get top marks in a digital story, and talk about whether you feel like you could scaffold this with your class. Is this something that's achievable for your students? Could you lead them through it? Okay, take a couple of minutes.
That's just before. If you look on Mary, oh yeah,
So is that forced to be? Yeah. Okay. And the volume on this is only okay. All right. Thanks very much. Sorry, it's good. I'm glad you got some good time to talk there. That was good. All right. So I don't know about you, but when I give this even to beginning teachers, it's quite helpful for them to be able to see, look, I could make some decisions here about what kind of category that would fall into. We have some discussions then about how this might match up with ETAQ grading or all of that kind of stuff. Those conversations don't make me happy. We're not going to have but, you know, I'll leave it up to you to apply that kind of thing to your school structure. Let's watch a couple of digital stories. And what I'd like you to do while you watch this is to have a think about where this student is going to fit in this marking criteria. For the moment, we don't differentiate between the junior school and the senior school. So year 7s, year 12s, they're all judged on the same criteria. I don't know if that's problematic. So far, I think it's been okay. Keep going.
Great. Making friends used to be so easy. You'd ask for their coloured pencils, then they would say they liked the picture you were drawing, and suddenly you'd be best friends. But then you'd move schools, and making friends becomes a challenge. That's what happened to me. Of course I knew people, but I didn't have a good friend right through primary school. Now, starting year 8, I don't really have many friends. Don't give me sympathy though. I'm fine. Not bullied and not lonely. And I have Jasper. No one else knows about Jasper. I'll get teased if they did. He's always there though, but only I can see him. Walking to our room fast swiftly, we get to the door, and I hear Jasper groan. There on the plaque in the blue wooden door is Mr. Green's name. Quietly, we enter the room, hoping not to be seen. But he spots us and greets me with a grin the size of the moon. "Hello," he half shouts. Forcing a smile onto my face, we walk to the back row of the wooden tables. Jasper sits next to me and rolls his eyes. Mr. Green greets everyone that comes into the room, apart from Jasper, of course, giving the impression of an overexcited dog. Just after we settle down and everyone has stopped bragging to each other about the amazing holiday they had, another boy enters the room. He has ginger hair and brown eyes. Mr. Green turns around. "Oh no, here he goes again," Jasper whispers to me. "Hello," Mr. Green's voice bouncing round the room. The boy shuffles back a bit and tries to smile. "You must be new." Mr. Green takes another step towards him. Nodding nervously, the boy looks round the room. I don't blame him for being nervous. His first class is run by a weirdo, Jasper whispers to me. He's right though. Mr. Green has to be the loopiest teacher in the school. "Don't worry, she'll take good care of you." I look up to see Mr. Green pushing the new boy towards me. I've momentarily become the boy's guide. "This isn't fair. Why me? I'm the quietest person in the class." He sits down next to me, right on top of Jasper. I glare at him, but he doesn't notice. Jasper stands next to me, arms crossed. The new boy turns to me. Hi, I'm Nick, he says, putting out his hand to shake mine. Ignoring him, I turn my head away while Jasper pulls faces at him. It's not his fault he took Jasper's spot, I guess. I don't want him to think that he can just take Jasper's place as my best friend. Finally, at the end of the lesson, I pack my stuff up, and Jasper and I exit the room. Uh-oh. The hallway is thundering with the sound of feet. I hope I don't get stuck in the middle of it. Where's Jasper? Ah, there he is, already near the grass area where we always sit. Wait, who's following me? It can't be Jasper playing tricks. It doesn't make any sound when he walks. I turn and see Nick standing just behind me. I wish he would go away, but I can't tell him. That would be me. Jasper huffs and sits down. I follow his lead, without the huffing, of course. Why can't you get him to go away? Jasper exclaims. The boy sits down next to me and starts asking questions. He's really starting to bug me now. Automatically, I turn my head to Jasper to see his expression. As I turn, all I see is a patch of grass. Jasper, I whisper. Did you say something? Nick looks up from the grass. No, nothing, I reply, not really concentrating on the question. Jasper, I repeat a bit louder. Who's Jasper? Nick asks, looking around like he expected to see someone. I ignore him and get up to look for my friend. Nick follows. Why can't he just leave me alone? I turn to him angrily and he takes a step back in surprise. Will you just go away? You're not my friend and I hate you, I yell. Instantaneously I cover my mouth. I'd never said something like that before. I sounded exactly like Jasper. Nick looks at me shocked for a few seconds, then turns around and walks back to the science floor. I didn't go after him. What's the point? I'm useless at making friends anyway. Later, as I enter the English room, I see Nick and another bunch of kids watching me. I don't care though, because Jasper's next to me again, making rude comments about them. As I put my books down on the table, I pull out 2 chairs, one for me and one for Jasper.
So, if you thought that was feeling a little bit longer than 2 to 3 minutes, because it was, it went for 4.5 minutes. Not one of the entries at the junior level in the ETAQ digital storytelling competition so far has delivered a story that meets all of the parameters, in the sense that it goes for the right length, it credits all the images, and it does, another couple of things, has narration. Not one. So if you can get your junior storytellers to at least be delivering a story that meets those parameters, then they're already starting to deal with that production medium in a more sophisticated way than a novice student who's just chucked into the deep end. Okay? So I'm just going to give you a really quick minute with your partner just to talk about the bottom 3 parameters and where you put them. So images, words, and the parameters section, and then I'll just take a quick question. All right, just take 1 minute, a quick one. Where would you put them?
Images, desaturated images.
There is a voice animation.
And obviously the and with the time frame, I think you could have been on that. And yeah, it does very
20 seconds.
If needed. Yeah, that's right. This is
5 seconds to go. Okay. All right. So just quietly finish up those conversations. I won't ask you all to report back because I want to move through another story and do a couple of things. But there was a question that you had in the middle there.
We can save it for later, but my question was about the format of the digital stories section.
Oh,
So
okay.
maybe later it doesn't need to be now.
Okay. I'll pop the link up right at the end with all of the forms and everything. But we don't allow every single type, but we allow all the main types. So window, like WMV files, MOV files if they're taking things out of Apple. There was one entry that did things on PowerPoint. and the entry was so fabulous, and because none of the juniors had met all of the parameters, he ended up coming second, even though he'd handed in on a PowerPoint and usually what I would do is I would just discount the students from first, second or third place that hadn't met the parameters and then start to evaluate the ones that did. But when none of them do, what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't recommend submitting other forms, but the general ones are all accepted. And then you just send it in on a DVD.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's all.
Because ours are doing it on iPads or Book Creator. I don't know what it's My Story.
So it's like,
Creator.
how do you export that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
So
okay, we'll think about that.
yeah, we'll have a chat about how that works. All right, cool. So let's watch another one. And that first one was out of the junior storytellers category. This other one's out of the senior one. It's not as long. She was good. It's like 3 minutes 22. So I kind of went, oh, that's plus or minus 30 seconds. You'll guess around me. So let's check this one off.
Program is closed captioned for the hearing impaired. Can you imagine the world without sound? I can. Do you know what it's like to not hear the wind, cars, birds, people talking or laughing? I do. In fact, I didn't hear my parents' voices until I was 1.5 years old. I spent the first birthday of my life without hearing anyone wish me happy birthday. When I was born profoundly deaf, my parents were told that I may never learn to talk. When I was 19 months old, they made an arduous decision to implant me with a cochlear implant. Since then, I've learned to hear and talk. I had to try hard to do things that others take for granted. But now I'm a teenager, growing up in two worlds. A world of sound and a world of silence. Many people ask me, what is it like to be deaf or hear out of cochlear implants? The truth is, I can't answer that question. I was born deaf. I have been deaf all my life, so I don't know any different way of living or hearing. I can tell you, it is not easy. Every day I get left out of conversations. I never know the latest gossip. I get cut off from the world because I can't hear the latest current affairs. And sometimes I feel like I don't exist. It's like everyone just forgets that I'm even there. I think most people believe that I'm a very quiet person, but I actually have a lot to say. The problem is, half the time, I don't even know what you're talking about. Even though I know I'm different at school, being the only deaf person in grade, I honestly don't feel different. I'm exactly like everyone else, except for the fact that I can switch my ears off whenever I desire. That doesn't make me different, just unique. Besides, if people laugh at me for being different, I laugh at them for all being the same. One of the best things about being deaf is that I can switch off from the world whenever I feel like it. Taking my implants off is like a drug to me. It is my daily dose of ecstasy, my chance to escape reality, be free for a while, and peace to myself. God made me deaf for a reason. I can't change who I am, and neither can you. You can choose to be nice, mean, change your favorite color or hobby, but you can't change who you are. I'm deaf, and that's just something I've learned to live with. Today, I'm so grateful that my parents made the decision to implant me 14 years ago, because now I have many more opportunities being part of two worlds. It has helped define who I am, and most importantly, I can hear and experience all of the wonderful sounds in the world God created for us.
I'll leave that play just because it was a really cool story, wasn't it? Like, wasn't that really good? But she's actually got, you know, at the back, this is original work by. And you could tell that those were pictures that she'd taken, as well as her words and things like that. So, again, 1 minute with your partner. This time, just the top two criteria, story and voice. How would you have placed the digital story you just saw? I'll take a minute to talk.
Set up for you know, that's, you know. And it also fits into that digital stories being a personal story, but taking but presenting their perspectives. Oh, definitely. Like production methods, oh, yeah. You know, and the persuasion was presented too. The images and how she changed pace from
All right. So just wind that conversation up. Thinking about story and voice. So if we had some more time, like if we were kind of going to go for 3 or 4 hours and do a half-day session or something like that, I would incorporate here us reporting back on where we went, to see if we were all in the same page.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Yeah, you
Kelli?
can. Yeah.
When you're looking at digital stories and the parameters you've set, when you're watching a production like the one we just viewed, she's using a limited amount of images, but she's repeating them.
Yes.
Do you count the repetition as several or just one?
That all of these questions, like as you're marking digital stories, so many new questions pop up. And when I watched hers, because my gut instinct was, no, can't do it. It's outside the parameters.
Yes.
But then you watch what she's done with it, and it's really done to good effect. And it's not like an animation. It is like that is the picture in the sequence, but it's a moving one. And I was marking it, I just thought, here's a perfect example of why it doesn't pay to be too rigid within parameters and say, nah, C for you, you know, because that, I think, was okay. The other thing is traditionally digital stories don't have words in them as well, like printed text. It's supposed to be image and spoken narration. And then when she put that stuff up, and I thought, equity, closed captions. Like, she's done such an astute thing to have put that into her digital story. And I just thought, hang it. I mean, and I looked closer and I thought, no, parameters don't actually say that you can't do that. That's just what I know about the conventions of traditional digital stories. So I was fine with it. And there were quite a few stories. It seems that teenagers cannot help, like they need a lot of guidance and scaffolding to stop their urge to put up a whole lot of red bleeding text about stuff. And then like pictures of their friends being sad about stuff. You know, it's like that. Or stories about a really interesting thing, not a personal story. Like hers was great because it was a personal story. So it's not so much telling a story about someone else, but what we can scaffold for them and what we can help them to do is to not just write some random story and then go on Google Image Finder to try and find pictures to fit. That's not how Hollywood movies are made. That's not how high quality production is made. You make the sound, the images, you know, you make all of the parts of it. And that doesn't mean that you can't go and use images from the internet, okay? Please don't misunderstand me, because there is a wealth of image files available online that have a Creative Commons license, which you're perfectly entitled to go and use. Technically, if you're making this stuff in school and you're not popping up on YouTube or anything, it's actually covered by fair use in copyright, so they can technically use copyrighted material for your project. We ask them not to for competition entries because it could go up on websites and things like that. So they can do really clever things where they might take this hodgepodge of 12 different pictures that don't belong to them, that are even from different authors, and then apply layers or things on top of it, give them all sepia tones. You know, they can do other things with producing text to give you a sense of flow and consistency. But when they've got, you know, a picture of Superman and picture of the grass and picture of the beach and someone's dog really close up and they're from totally different cameras, totally different people, and it's meant to talk about the day we went to the beach, you just think this is not being thought through. But it's a good first try. You know, that's going to be the first try for a lot of them. Just some random story, Google Images, and then maybe credits that go for 5 minutes after the 2. Credits would be great, Very few of our competition entries put credits at the end to acknowledge their images. Even if they put on the form, yes, yes, then mine, or whatever, they didn't say, these are my images. Little things.
I was expecting a creative fiction
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
So did it not bother you that it was non-fiction and personal?
No, it didn't bother me, because the tradition of digital stories, and I only mean tradition in the sense of this is where they came out of, was autobiography. So the stuff that Daniel Meadows did in the UK was all around community-based art, where people would come in and it was about telling your story and using that as a way to learn digital mediums. So traditionally, digital stories are autobiographic. On our competition entry form, though, we let them pick categories. So they indicate for us, is this a made-up story? Like, is this an original story? Or is this an autobiographical or biographical story? Or is this a retelling of an existing story? So if they wanted to do some kind of remix or retelling of the novel that they're doing in class or a poem, you know, something like that, there's space for that, and they will just tick which category they feel that it belongs in. Yeah. And there's no restriction about how many awards get for each of them, just so that we know where they were trying to go with that. Yeah. Okay, so the other thing I put into your handout today, and we've run out of time to do this as a proper activity, but giving this to you alone, I think you'll get the point. So the other big thing, I've been talking a bit about what you can scaffold them through in terms of avoiding mistakes, but what can you give them in terms of how to make that production leap? So what I started to do was to set myself this own challenge. I do like to follow that dictum of, you know, don't set stuff to students that you haven't tried yourself. So I do try and make my own digital stories, and this is the one that I've gotten the furthest way through. And it's a digital story about going to the coffee shop. And the story, I'll spoil it a little bit, but the story is that, you know, you go to the coffee shop, and for me, I don't like to talk people at the coffee shop. I go there for like my little bubble of solitude. But I've got this friend that no matter what shop we go to around Brisbane, she seems to know the person behind the counter. And so you go, and she's like, oh, Louise, how are the kids? I'm like, how do you know all these people? Well, I think she was originally from Townsville, and I've heard they're more friendly up there. So I reckon maybe that's it. And I'm from Sydney, and we're not renowned for our friendliness. So maybe that's it. But we've just got very contrasting experiences in coffee shops. So that's the digital story that I'm trying to put together. And so because I know that's the story, and I've got a little draft of my story that I'm working on, I've been trying to seek out opportunities to take pictures that are going to match that story. And so you've got them here in black and white, and you could do this with your students. You go and you take about 8 to 12 pictures of, you know, whatever is around a theme, a soccer match, the beach, a coffee, a wedding ring, you know, whatever it is. And then you give them those pictures and you ask them to sequence them. And you ask them to write a story that's going to match those pictures. Get them to start with the pictures first and figure out a story that can pull those pictures together. Not because that's the best way to write a digital story, that's just one way in, but because they're probably not starting that way themselves. They're probably going the other way. So just getting them to practice going the other way kind of uses that muscle. And then it'll be very difficult for them to go back to that other mode of write a story, do a random Google image grab, because they will have already seen the power of combining images that come from a common place around a common theme. So that's one tip that I would give you, is to make something like this, a little handout where then they get numbers, and you might even turn it into a storyboard where they can literally cut and paste stuff and write stuff in the bottom. If you've got iPads that do that in a sexy way, then you could do that. Right. So can you just chuck on the last couple of slides? These aren't very long. So we're close to the end of the session, but I'll just show you the last two, because I did promise just the takeaways in terms of what do you tell the boss. Where is the actual value? Why would I bother doing digital stories instead of doing ordinary written stories or whatever? So go through to the next. Oh, we already played. Next one and next one. Okay. So this is why. It's something where you can create, you can design, you can produce whatever kind of word you want to put in that place. In English, we are notorious for making students do a lot of analysis and not enough creative work. So there's the big one. Hey boss, we're supposed to be doing more creative work. So here's a way we could do it. Making digital stories develops these things. Some of these are not surprising, but some of these might be an arsenal to your argument. Firstly, higher order thinking. Every time our students are doing things that involve that level of creation after doing some analysis, they've got some higher order thinking going on. So if your school likes that buzzword, then we're right here. It's going to develop their digital literacy by default. A lot of these movies can be very, very easily made with very basic programs. You know, iMovie, Movie Maker, basic stuff. You don't need anything flash. But learning those alone is really important to do. Problem-solving skills via project work. You know, anyone who was in here before and listened to Di heard that story that we're all really familiar with, where you start an awesome unit on something like graphic novels, and the end is supposed to be producing something, but you run out of time, and so the students don't do the product. So if your whole unit is based around the project of making a digital story, and the only reason you study it is all in the purpose of making the digital story, then they'll be creating along the whole time. Even if they don't all finish a polished product, they should all finish some kind of product, and they will have to use problem-solving skills in order to do that. Here are the last two that are especially for your heads of department that know about English. I think that digital storytelling helps students to develop their narrative voice. We talk a lot with students about narrative voice, and many of them have got no idea what we're talking about. How do I find my voice? Even myself, when I, as an English teacher, trying to do some writing, having to think about my own narrative voice. What is that? You know, you've got to do a lot of exercises to try and find what that even is. And I think that because they literally have to speak, and they've got the opportunity to do autobiographies, that this really helps them find, do I like telling funny stories? Do I like having creative insights into life? Am I a philosopher? Like, what do I want to talk about? And lastly, awareness of imagery and symbolism. Once they've had to pick pictures that are symbolic of the story that they're telling, then they will be more ready to find those in other works. So if your students are struggling with that concept of figurative thinking, of imagery and symbolism, then getting them to make digital stories will definitely enhance that capacity. Okay, so just the last one, which is my goodbye references and stuff. So once you jump onto SlideShare, you can get those. I think that's it.
Just on behalf of everyone here, we have a little thank you for you. It's a lovely certificate from the mystery blue box. So congratulations and thank you. I'm sure that we have many buzzwords to take home to Powers that be.
Yes.
After the 2 sessions.
Thanks so much. And we didn't get lots of time for heaps of question and answers, but I'm very happy to hang back for you or email me or pick my brains anytime.
Thank you, Kelli.
Thanks.